Now we're going to create the server part of the proxy design pattern example. And as you recall, there's going to be client code that uses what it thinks is an automat object. This is a rental automat of the kind that was developed when we discussed the state design pattern. And actually it's going to be using a proxy, an automat proxy, which supports the methods of an automat object, but in fact behind the scenes talks to an automat server. And this automat proxy is going to be a stand-in or a surrogate for the actual automat object itself. We're going to start by creating the automat server. We're actually going to connect the proxy and server using Java sockets. These are internet sockets that allow you to correspond over the internet. So we're going to actually work with a server that can connect to proxies over the internet, and so in fact you'll be able to use this client code if you want to anywhere in the world, and the automat server anywhere else in the world, and you can connect over the internet if you want, and then you can have your client code try to rent an apartment from the automat, and in fact we'll be dealing with an automat proxy, and behind the scenes we'll be calling the automat server. So the first task now is to create the automat server, and we're going to implement the automat interface, which has all these methods. I'm not going to go through all these methods again because we did that in the state design pattern. But the important part here is setting up the proxy. And so this is the server part. We're going to start by doing some imports for the correct Java packages. And then we're going to try to set up a socket. When you run this automat server program, then you're going to start by setting up a new server socket, a Java server socket. The server socket is going to allow you to accept incoming connections from the automat proxy, and the server socket is going to be stored in a variable named socket, and it's going to use port number 8765. Just sort of a random choice, port number 8765 on the current computer, and we're going to configure the socket so that it accepts connection requests from the proxy, the automat proxy, and it's going to store that in a variable named communication socket. This communication socket then has a method called getOutputStream, which you can then convert to a printWriter object. And it's a little bit abstract, but a little bit abstruse, but that's the way Java works. And so now you have an object we're going to call out, and we're going to use that out object to write text back to the automat proxy. So this is the connection. This object represents the connection to the automat proxy for us. So this is the connection. This object represents the connection to the automat proxy for us. And we're going to now set up a new thread, a worker thread. This worker thread is going to handle the incoming data from the internet proxy. This is the outgoing data, and in this thread, we're going to handle the incoming data, as you're going to see. This is the run method in which the thread runs, and there's a little bit of details here, but it's not really too difficult. You create a new buffered reader object from the communication socket's input stream. So you use the communication socket's input stream, you create a new input stream reader object and a new buffered reader object from that. This is going to create an object we're going to call in, and this in object handles the incoming text from the proxy, from the automat proxy, just as the out object is going to handle text being sent to that proxy. Okay, so now we're going to check the in object's text by using the in object's readline method. I'm going to loop over that incoming text and store it in a variable called each string that's sent to us, store it in a variable called incoming string. So incoming string equals, these are the names of the methods that the proxy might want us to run. If the proxy wants us to run got application, we run the got application method in the server, and the check application. If the proxy sends us a message that it wants the check application method run, we run the check application method. If the proxy has sent us the message that it wants the rent apartment method run, we run the rent apartment method. Okay, so that handles incoming commands from the proxy. Next, we're going to have to send back data to the proxy. In other words, we got the message that it wants to run the got application method, for example. Now we're going to have to, in the got application method, we're going to have to send data back to the results of running that application back to the proxy. And the old ways we did this was we said system out println and then state.getApplication. Okay, well that's not going to work here because system.out.println prints to the terminal. Instead we want to send our data back to the proxy. And how do you do that? You're going to have to modify all these getApplication, all the methods, getApplication, check applications, and rent department. You're going to have to modify that instead to use that out object. You say out.println. This will send, out.println will send the results of running the getApplication method back to the proxy. That's the only real change you have to make here. So in the getApplication method, you say out.println, and you use the state objects getApplication method, and you send the results of that running that getApplication method back to the proxy by using that out object. The same with a check application. You say out.println state.checkApplication, and the same with rent department. You do like this. You say out.println state.rent department and then state.dispense keys. So you're actually executing methods on the server, but you are sending the results of the execution back to the proxy using the out object. So in fact, it's not all that difficult. It takes a lot of setting up, but once you have the in and out objects, it's not that difficult to communicate with the proxy. The proxy sends data and you get it on the in using the in object, and you send the results back of executing the various methods that were requested using the out object. So that's the server. As you see, there's some detailed Java going on here, but once you master that, once you set it up, then using the in and out objects to communicate with the proxy via the internet is not so difficult. So now we're going to finish up with creating the server and then start working on creating the proxy object next. And the proxy object is going to connect to the server, send it strings such as getApplication, checkApplication, and rent department. And when the server gets those strings, it's going to execute the appropriate method and send back the results of executing that method back to the proxy using the out object. So you see, all we're doing here is we are converting our automat, our rental automat, to start working over the internet so that you can use a proxy with your client code rather than an actual automat object. So next up is the creation of the proxy object.